Hello, and welcome to the Former Inmates for Change podcast. Each show will feature interviews with former inmates as they share their stories and experiences with the criminal justice system. We will be discussing topics ranging from drugs, gangs, prison culture, prison reform, and much more. We invite you to submit questions and comments at inmates4change@gmail.com. You can also visit us on the web at inmatesforchange.com. And don't forget to follow on Instagram at inmates4change1 and subscribe on YouTube, Former Inmates for Change. Thank you, and stay tuned for more exciting interviews and conversations.
Introduce yourself and kind of tell everybody where you're from, and just kind of tell them your story.
Okay, that's easy. My name's Rob Beer. I'm from Erie, Pennsylvania. I currently live in Gastonia, North Carolina. I had relocated down here once I got out of prison to be closer to my family who had moved to Charlotte during my incarceration. As far as getting into the criminal justice system and how my story began. When I was a kid, I was one of those out of control kids. I had a lot of behavioral problems, and at the age of 8, it kind of reached the boiling point for my parents, and they were at a loss as of what to do. And I went to Children's Services, and I went into the system. Then I went into an emergency foster home, then into a children's center, and I went that route for about 8 straight years from the age of 8 until I was 16. I went in front of the judge every 6 months. At that time, I wasn't necessarily into criminal activity. I was just more behavioral problems, and
Right.
I was uncontrollable for my parents. I had a lot of anger. My mom always said I was a very angry child.
Mm-hmm.
When I got, go ahead.
What do you think? What do you think that anger came from, or what would you attribute that to?
Honestly, I think when I was born, my parents put me up for adoption, my biological parents, and I was in one foster home for 18 months. I think they had tried to adopt me, but they were turned down by the judge. So at that point, they were kind of hands off, to protect themselves, and so I don't think that I was picked up a lot as a child or anything like that. When my mom and dad adopted me, my mom said I would scream and holler to be picked up, and then I'd scream and holler to be put back down. And
Wow.
as I grew older and, I learned that I was adopted, and my parents never kept that from me. I always felt that I was unwanted. And, that always bothered me. That was always, even as a young kid, I always felt like, that my biological parents didn't want me. And, that I had a lot of anger towards them. As I got older and I look back, I realized that, my parents who adopted me were my parents all along, and they just had to find me, and I had to find them.
Right.
And I'm more blessed than not wanted.
Okay. All right. Well, good. So, like, let's kind of move on. Tell them like how you got into the criminal justice system, and basically how your story, with the criminal justice system, where does that begin?
Okay, I had some minor run-ins with the law. I just wasn't doing things I was supposed to be doing when I came home from the military. I had been arrested my senior year of high school. I had caught a break. I could still enlist in the military. When I came home, I was going to school. I always had like good friends and bad friends. I always tend to go towards the bad friends. And, there's a lot of drinking and drugging, and my brother and other friends of mine, we would just do stupid stuff. There was, I'd say probably my most significant run-in with the law was in March of 1999 when I was arrested for pretty serious assault charges that my brother and I were involved in. We were involved in an altercation with some people at a bar. And that pretty much started the serious step into the criminal justice system. I was in jail for 18 months at that time over that. At the time, I was on probation, or I had got put on probation. I'm sorry, for that case. And of course, I never, I sat in jail for a while. I bailed on I jumped bail, turned
Mm.
myself in later. But when I got my probation, revoked for that, I did 18 months for that one. That, and I was always breaking the conditions of my supervision. Like, I've never successfully completed probation or parole, and
Okay.
I was catching new cases. I caught a DUI. I got out. Matter of fact, I got out of jail one day. My brother picked me up at 11 in the morning, and I was back in the county jail that night with a DUI at midnight.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
just stupid stuff. And in the course of that, I was doing a lot of illegal activities that I wasn't being caught for. I had a stolen
Mm-hmm.
car that I got in trouble for. But I was doing a lot of stuff that I wasn't, in trouble for. Like, I was selling drugs. I was doing things that I shouldn't have been doing. And
Mm-hmm.
luckily I wasn't caught for those things, but it all added up to, deciding that I was going to rob a bank when I was 29.
Right.
I had put myself into I had gotten myself into a bad situation, and I didn't see any other way out. And so I got this brilliant idea that I was going to rob a bank, and that was going
Mm.
to make everything better. And of course, that's not how it worked out.
Right. Wow. 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 Okay. Okay. So you get in trouble for robbing the bank, and what happens? What happens after that?
Oh man, at the time that I got arrested, I was arrested on January 31st, 2004, and my girlfriend at the time was pregnant, and we had an appointment for 2 days later to find out if we were gonna have a boy or a girl, and I found out I was gonna have
Mm.
a girl. My daughter was born on July 6th, and about a month later, on August 16th, I was sentenced to 209 months in federal prison. And
Mm.
I was incarcerated for, my daughter's first 15 years of her life.
So touch on that for a minute. So you get sentenced to 209 months. What's that? What's the feeling like when the judge says 209 months? Like, what's going through your mind? What's going through your head? And like, how do you process all of that?
Well, it's a weird thing because the federal court system is fairly easy to calculate what you're looking at. And I had known
Mm-hmm.
all along, that I was looking at 15 and a half to 17 and a half. So in one sense,
Mm-hmm.
I was slightly prepared for it. And you know,
Mm.
but still, when I remember standing in court, and I remember my lawyer saying, "Hey, I think we'll get the low end of the guidelines." And I looked around the courtroom, and I realized, like, there was nobody in there. I had my daughter's mother and a reporter from the newspaper, and
Wow.
there was nobody else in there. And I remember thinking,
Mm-hmm.
like this is what you've done with your life. Like, there's nobody here to speak up about to speak
Wow.
on behalf
Wow.
to say anything good. And I kind of knew at that point that I was going to get the high end of the guidelines. I just had that feeling. And
Mm-hmm.
when he had sentenced me to the 209 months, it was just a sinking feeling. I remember just thinking, like, man, there's nothing I can do to change this. There's nothing I can do to make this better. There's nothing I can do to make this go away. And
Right. Right.
even my lawyer saying, well, you're only going to do 15, like, that wasn't reassuring. That was 15 years of my life that was gone. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a selfish thought, because it wasn't until later that I realized that it was 15 years that I took myself away from my parents, I took myself away from my family, and I took myself away from my daughter.
Right. So you're thinking about the other folks that you impacted by the decisions. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
But it was selfish at first, because at first I only thought about myself. I was like, wow, it's
Mm-hmm.
15 years. And, I always equated to, like, the amount of money that I got was not very significant, and it was,
Mm.
oh, this is what you give me. But, I had to realize, like, it wasn't what I took, it was what I had done. You
Right. Right.
know,
Right.
time.
Okay. Okay. All right, so you get 209 months. They send you off to the BOP. What was the first institution that you went to,
Uh,
and like what was the first day like?
oh man, I went to the first institution I went to was USP1 Coleman in Coleman, Florida, just outside of Orlando. And
Mm-hmm.
I went down there because my daughter's mother and I were in a custody dispute, and had she won, she was going to take my daughter to Florida, so I needed to be as close to her as possible. But
Right.
I remember pulling up to the jails. You're on a bus, with a bunch of other people, and Coleman's a large complex, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a camp, a low, a medium, and two penitentiaries. But when you first get there, you see the camp, and you're like, oh, this isn't too bad. Then you pull in and you see the low and the medium, and you drop guys off, and they go in the front door, and there's a fence, and you can see the yard. And I was thinking, well, this looks all right. And then
Yeah.
you drive up through the trees, and you get it to the penitentiary, and all you see is this, tall wall and gun towers. And it
Mm.
kind of sits in like, this is a lot more real than I thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a gentleman on the bus with me. He was a native guy. My mother's native. My father's black and white. And,
Mm-hmm.
so we were talking, and he said, oh, your mother's native. He's like, well, stick with me. I'll show you what you got to do. So when I first got to the yard, I got there probably about 8:30 at night. And, the yard for the most part was shut down. It was just guys going to pill line. And we were walking down to the intake unit. And I just remember seeing the
Mm-hmm.
gun towers and the barbed wire on the fence. And, I was just like, man, what have I gotten myself into? I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily scared. I was just like, okay, this is where I'm gonna be. Um, the next day, my first full day, like I was a fresh fish. Like I didn't necessarily know the rules. And I was taken to the shot caller of the natives, and introduced myself and given a care package. And then
Mm-hmm.
it starts the process of like, the convict background check. Like, get your paperwork, show me who you are, show me you're not a rat or a
Right. Right. Right.
child molester, because those things will get you killed. And
Right. Right.
it was sobering. You like, you look around and you just see, like, I always knew I was better than the circumstances I had put myself into.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, I always, I just was amazed that this is what I had put myself into. Like, this is what I had earned in life. I think that
Mm-hmm. Right.
my greatest fear, probably that first few months that I was on the yard, was that I was going to lose my humanity. Because I mean, when you're treated as a, fourth class citizen by the officers.
Mm-hmm.
And then just the things that you see, and you have to kind of turn yourself off to him. Like, the first stabbing I saw, like probably 3 or 4 days after I got to the yard, was a guy in a wheelchair that was getting stabbed up by another person. And
Mm.
the human being in you wants to go over and stop it, or to do what you can. But then the convict in you realizes it's not your business, and you don't know what it's about. And
Right. Right.
you have
Right.
to shut that.
Because a lot of people don't understand the difference between, like, you went to USP, so like a lot of people don't understand the difference between a low, a medium, and then the USP. So there's a lot more danger that's involved with the USP.
Way more danger. It's the penitentiaries are, the majority of people that go to the penitentiaries, a lot of them don't have outdates, or their outdates are so long from, they may as well not have an outdate. And it's
Mm.
definitely a different environment. The three rules, as they were always explained to me by the officers, were: don't stab me, don't stab him, and don't go over the wall. So
Mm.
other than that, honestly, it's, the penitentiaries in a lot of ways are they're managed by the staff, but they're run by the inmates. Like, they
Gotcha.
take
Uh,
who stays on the yard, who goes. I mean, and there's a lot more violence, at the medium and the low than there is medium
mhm.
or the low. And the sad thing is, I did 10 years in the penitentiary, and it got to the point where I didn't even want to go to the medium, because I had become so
Mm.
comfortable. Like, the guards leave you alone. Like, I had been in them for a while. So with my native community, I had a little bit of juice. I had,
Mhm.
you know, there was kind of like some perks that came with it. And, you get comfortable, in your environment. And, I probably would have stayed there and finished it, but I had always told my daughter had asked me one time, like, Dad, why are you so far away? And, I told her if she ever wanted me to get closer, all she would have to do was ask. And, she did,
Okay.
so I put in for a medium. And, you know, that was a big change in a completely different environment, but
Wow.
I was in Coleman for 19 months, and then I transferred back to USP Allenwood in White Deer, PA. I stayed there until my parents relocated. My sister had taken a job in Charlotte, and my parents followed shortly thereafter. And I put in for USP Lee in Virginia to get as close to Charlotte as I could at that time.
Be closer, yeah.
Yeah, at that time I wasn't eligible for an FCI, so it was the closest I could get.
Okay. So let me ask you this. So, like, how do you? I mean, obviously you survived the BOP. So, like, what do you attribute to your survival? What do you attribute that to? Like, how did you make it in the USP?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's I think I always try to surround myself with good people. Like, you have to walk a line, and you have to be true to the convict side of you, because that's your life, and that's for some people that's all they have, and that's what counts. And I also try to stay true to my family and stay true to my own personal ideals. So one thing that I always did, I programmed a lot. I tried to like, I knew my way wasn't the right way. And not every staff member was anti-inmate, or there was a lot of staff members that were that wanted to see you improve and wanted to see you become better, and so I programmed a lot. I got into facilitating programs a lot. I was given that opportunity pretty early, but I also surrounded myself with like-minded individuals on the yard. The majority of people in prison are just trying to do their time and get home, and really, I'd say the majority of people in prison play a role. Like, we play a role, like, hey, this is how we are. But when you're talking to somebody in a cell, or you're talking to somebody on the yard, you often realize, like, they just want to get home as bad as you do.
Right. Yeah, a lot of times when I go into the facilities and I talk to guys, I always try to share with them the importance of programming and taking advantage of all the programming that's available. So it's like that when guys do get out, and even some of the ladies when they get out, they can utilize some of those skills that they learn. So what do you think? What did you learn through the programming? How did that
I
help
think a
you?
lot of the programming, it taught me. I was very terrible with impulse. I would I would respond impulsively to a lot of things, to a lot of situations. Like, the first thing that would pop into my mind, I'd often do, and worry about the consequences later. And I think when you humble yourself, like I humbled myself, and I listened to other people's suggestions, and I started to apply thought processes to my decision making. And I've had countless conversations with staff and with other inmates, and different things that I would hear them say, or things that they use to change their lives around. And I think that, as far as in prison, like, especially in the penitentiary, you don't have to work if you don't want to. Like, you can get a no-show, no-pay job and just kind of do what you want. But I always try to stay busy. So for 15 years, I went to work every day. I got up when the doors cracked at 5:30. I went to work every day. I acquired a work ethic, because before I never had a work ethic. I kind of just did whatever I wanted to do, and it was more fun to make money not working. But in prison, I acquired a work ethic. And I think one of the best things that happened to me as far as prison, was working every day. I didn't have the luxury of showing up late or leaving early or not coming in. I had to go to work. So what that's translated to now is, I don't call in. I try not to be late. I try not to leave early. So I think prison was good in that aspect. It's made me a pretty decent employee. Other things I learned too, mostly what I learned is that, I listened to some guys. Some guys just took programs so that they could get, points off and transfer or drop their custody. And one
Mm-hmm.
thing that I still learned stuff from those guys too. Like sometimes they'd bring negativity to the group, and it was interesting to see negativity that you presented, at one time,
Right, right.
and you could see how you sounded and you could see how you looked, and it was just like a
Mm.
reaffirmation, like I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be that person, you know.
Right,
Um
right.
so I tried to use that to my benefit. Like I learned something from good guys and from bad guys in prison.
Mm. That's interesting. Okay. All right. Cool deal. So let me ask another question. Actually, it's a two-part. So, like, the hardest part about being in prison, and of course, what advice you would give to young women and men um, who may be going through some of the things that you went through, and what advice would you give them?
I think the hardest part about being in prison was, at first it was just the knowledge that you're removed from society, like you can't do the things you want to do.
Mm,
But then, when you think about it and you realize, like, that's kind of a selfish way to think. You begin to think of the other things, and you think, like for myself, I always thought about not being in my daughter's life, and I always thought about the things that I wouldn't be able to do with her. Teach her how to tie her shoes, ride
mm,
a bike, chase the monster away from under her bed, kiss the
right.
bruised knee, talk to her about what kind of boy she should have in her life. It was those things. And I think about the toll that I took on my parents, like at the time of my arrest, my mother had FBI agents in her house and tactical gear telling her that they're going to shoot her oldest son, you know, and,
Mm,
you remove
wow.
yourself from their lives, and they're doing time with you. I know it's so cliche, but they really do. And then, of course, like the losses, my grandmother, my cousin, other cousins, my godfather, you lose these people, and you don't always get a phone call to talk to them before they die. Sometimes you just get calls saying
Right.
they've passed,
Wow.
and you can't be there, and you take away from them the opportunity for them to tell you what you meant to them, and how much they loved you, and to, see you one last time. So it was,
Mm,
I would think that would be the hardest part, aside from getting out and trying to restart at 45 years old. Uh, the advice
right.
that I would give, is, I mean, the advice that I would give a young man or woman that was, living the kind of life that I was living, is that, it's so much better doing things the right way. And I think that we have to. I just had a conversation with a guy I met in Walmart yesterday, talking about learning how to
Hmm.
be content with what we have and finding value in what we have rather than in pursuing, value in material things.
Right.
I
Right.
think, we're all responsible for the choices that we make. And sometimes we feel like the odds are stacked against us. But what I've learned is that the odds aren't written in stone. You know, nothing,
Right. Right.
nothing somebody says that if somebody says I have to act this way or I have to be this way, like that's not true. And the
Hmm.
opportunities exist for us to be whatever we want. And I,
Mm,
I I look at friends of mine. I look at my mother. She didn't have the greatest life growing up, but she's very successful in her life, and she worked hard for that. Um,
right.
so my advice would be like the importance of school. I'm very grateful my parents were always big on education, and that was a motivating factor in prison.
Hmm.
Um, I would also say that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go
It's
ahead.
no, no, no. You're good. No, I was gonna say if and just chime in. Like it's interesting you said that. I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and we were talking about buying houses and having families and getting married and you know coming out of college for me, it was like the next thing to do. Society tells you you got to go off to school and get married and have 2.3 children, a white picket fence, and a dog. And if you don't do that, there's something wrong. And so you start to believe and internalize and think that, man, I got to hurry up and do this and do that. And one of my partners, he would always remind me, and we'd have these conversations. He would always say, like, you got to remember, like, our parents weren't they were in their 40s before they bought their first home, or to this day, my dad has never had a brand new car, but they were able to provide, and they live a decent life, So like a lot of times and especially a lot of young men and women that I speak with, they're always, they want the nice things, they want, whatever lifestyle that they see on TV, and it becomes almost like a false sense of identity that they're pursuing, instead of being themselves. They want to be other people, So I think that's important that, we be comfortable where we are and work towards what we want to be versus trying to accelerate a certain lifestyle or a certain pattern that we think is what we want or what society tells us we ought to have.
Oh, for sure. I think it's funny because like it pains me now to spend more than $50 on a pair of shoes. And like I
Right.
do most of my shopping in thrift stores, and and it's funny
Yeah.
because I would never think like that before. Like before I always had to put on this image, like I'd have to have these expensive
Right.
shoes and have all this expensive clothes, and and that's such nonsense. Like at the end of the day, that means absolutely nothing. You know? And
Right.
we
Right.
all want to be different. We all want to blaze our own path. But when we're, you know, buying what everybody else is buying to be as cool as everybody else, we're kind of, just towing the line, and we're not blazing our own path.
Yeah.
So, I think that
Yeah.
I also think that, it's kind of like the culture we live in. Like if you watch music videos, or you see things, every TV show is all about like the physical and the material. And it puts, I think
Mm-hmm.
every crime is, I think most crimes, especially in the feds, because most of them are drug related, or bank robbery, white collar,
Yeah.
are mostly all
Yeah.
money oriented. It's all geared towards getting as much money as I can, to, and that determines my success. I was just sitting here paying bills before
Right.
you called, and it's just like it feels good to be paying my bills, even though my bank account's getting smaller. It feels good to be doing that, and it feels great to know that I have worked for it.
Right. 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 Well, good, man. Good. Good, man. So before we end, man, kind of tell the folks what you're doing today and what you're doing right now, and how, just kind of give them a little bit of insight, how far you've come along
Well,
since
I
being
got
released.
out 15 years to the day, January 31st, 2019. I went to the halfway house in Gastonia, at the Gaston County Sheriff's Department. And it was I was coming to a new town and not really knowing anybody. I had very good people placed in my path. Both I guess free world people and ex-cons that were kind of on the same path as me, and they pointed me in the right direction. And I was fortunate to
Mm-hmm.
get hired on as a temp with a really good machine shop here in Gastonia. They taught me a lot of skills. I stayed with them for probably I'd say about 9 months. And, I just always knew that I wanted to do more than a machine shop. And I love those guys, and I love that job, and I love the skills that I obtained, but I was searching on the
Mm-hmm.
internet, and I put together a resume, and I was on, ZipRecruiter and all those other spots. And I put a resume in for a warehouse manager position with a wine wholesaler, and he reached out to me. And it was pretty obvious from my resume that I was incarcerated. It was all prison jobs except for one. And we went for an
Mm-hmm.
interview for about an hour and a half, and he gave me the job. And
Wow.
so in less than a year, I got out of the halfway house on April 5th, which is my actual release date. So in 7 months, I had went from a machine shop job to a warehouse manager job, and I've loved it.
Warehouse
And
manager.
I've
Wow.
loved every day of it. It's challenging sometimes. My boss is a great guy to work for. My coworkers are awesome, and it's the funny thing is I turned 10 years of working in the commissary in prison into what hopefully is my career. And
Mm. Wow. Wow.
so I'm in a pretty good spot right now. I drive a new car. Well, I bought it new. I live in a nice apartment. I have a decent relationship with my family. I'd like to have a better one with my daughter, of course. We haven't spoken since
Mm-hmm.
I've come home, and I have to respect that. But all I can do is what I've been doing, and hope that she sees that and she says, "Hey, you know what? My dad screwed up, but when he came home, he did everything he said he was going to do." And maybe she'll
Right.
open that door for me. But I'm not where I want to be, but I'm very grateful for where I am. And I know that, I will not do anything that will put me back into prison, and I will not do anything that will jeopardize the relationship I have with my family. Because I know if I do anything that would send me back, like that would be it for my family, you know. Like they stayed there
Right.
for
Right.
15 years, my mother and father would visit me in prison, and it's very degrading for somebody to come into a prison to visit. They're treated like a criminal. And I think about that,
Mm.
and I talk to my mother every Sunday for 15 years. And, so I know that if I was to screw up, like I would lose all that, and it's just not worth it. And I always talk to
Mm.
people like that have never been in prison. And even my friends that have been in and have gotten out, we always say, the worst day on the street is better than the best day in prison. Even when
Mm.
it's piling up out
Right.
here, and it's, you know, especially now and right now in today's times, it's a little hectic, but I would take this over staying in that little tiny cell with another man, over anything.
Right. Wow. 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 That's so true, man. So true. Well, we're running out of time here, but I wanted to thank you for taking time and telling us your story. And I'm sure we'll get together again and do another interview. And I wish you well and continued success. And keep
Yeah,
doing
I
what you're
appreciate it,
doing, man.
Mr. Swinton. I always do. And I look forward to doing this as often as possible.
Absolutely. All right. Well, you take it easy, man, and I'll catch up with you, and we'll get together
Yes,
another
sir.
time.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thank you.